Okay, good evening. I'm Matthew Spaulding, Associate Vice President Dean here at Hillsdale College in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Kirby Center for our conversation tonight about midterms with a great group of people. And moderating this evening and telling you more about that is Michael Anton, who's a research fellow here and also lecturer teaches recently of the Trump administration, now with Hillsdale College. So Mike, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm going to do very quick introductions. We have with us Henry Olsen, Mike Franc, and Mary Katherine Haam. I know Henry Olsen, I've known him for a long time, so if I wanted to give anyone an introduction, I could go on for 10 or 15 minutes about Henry. I won't, because it would be unfair to the other two. I will say I had to give a couple of presentations of my own last week in California, and the only thing people wanted to ask was, what's going to happen in the midterms? And I had a very short answer to that. I don't know. Go read Henry Olsen. It was an effective answer, and I think it was also good for the audience in that I didn't mislead them. So I have a four-part. I'm just going to begin with it sounds ambitious, but I think it's the right question. It's a four-part question you can all answer, and it gives you a latitude to kind of say whatever you want, whatever's on your mind. Who won? Part one. Part two. Who lost? Part three. What happened that you expected, that you saw coming, and part four is what was unexpected or surprising. And we'll just go in the order that we're seated. So Henry, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, thank you, Mike. Who won? Trump and the Democrats won, but Trump more than the Democrats. The reason why is that despite everything that's been thrown against him, if you take a look at the map, the Trump coalition held together in every state that he won, with the exception of Michigan and Pennsylvania. That only a slight improvement in Wisconsin, and Trump is reelected president. And that's at an approval rating of 44%, because the Trump coalition came out for somebody else besides Donald Trump. If I were the Democrats, I would be very, very worried about that. I think that what happened, most of the night happened according to my pre-election prediction memo, so I wasn't very surprised about much. That the election is basically a battle between the importance of what I called in the memo rhinos and tigers. Rhinos, Republicans in name only, are the reason why the Democrats took the House. That people who were in the early part of this decade the left wing of the Republican Party are now in revolt against the new party leadership, and they are voting with their old enemies, Democrats, and that's why Karen Handel, who represents a suburban seat in Atlanta that Romney won by 23 points, lost, is because 1 in every 5 of those voters, or basically 1/10 or 1/6 of those voters have switched parties. But the tigers are Trump is great Republicans. They are the blue-collar former Democrats, and they came out too. That what saved the Republican Party's bacon is that they came out for people who weren't Donald Trump. And if you take a look at the Senate seats in the Midwest that the Democrats lost, if you just look at the cities and the suburbs and compare it to their winning margin 6 years ago, they should have won re-election. If the elections in Mississippi were about Kansas City, Springfield, Columbia, and St. Louis, Claire McCaskill comes back. The reason she loses by 6 points is because small town in rural Missouri comes out against her, and that's people who aren't normally Republican. And that gets to the last thing that did surprise me, which was all of the data going into the race suggested that we Republicans would lose more Obama-Trump voters, more tigers, than was optimal. And instead, even though they weren't getting picked up in the polls or they were lying to pollsters, they came home, and that's why Mike DeWine is governor. That's why we picked up a number of Senate seats, and that was probably the most pleasant surprise of the evening.
Okay, thank you.
Winner, I'd say, would be the ongoing process of the parties sorting and redefining or recalibrating their political base, which I think has been going on for a long time. A lot of talk about a wave, blue wave, for example, obviously talked about a lot. It probably is a blue wave, but I don't think it happens in one cycle. I think it's been an ongoing thing, as there is a red wave, going back probably to early 2000s when different kinds of elites started to gravitate in increasing numbers and over time, from a Republican, maybe a country club Republican orientation to a Democratic orientation. And I think this election might have completed that sort. I'll give you a couple examples. If you took all congressional districts, and I'm obsessed with this for the last few years, I like to study this stuff. It helps that my career is such that I know a lot of these members, so you can kind of look at the demographics of the seat and say, oh, that explains why a congressman or congresswoman so-and-so said this or said that, or focuses on one thing rather than another. And basically, if you tell me a little bit about a demographic such as median home value, or the percentage of households in a district that have incomes of 200 and over, percentage of people in the district who are military veterans, or work in blue-collar positions, or have graduate school training, or have income somewhere in the middle, let's say 35 to 100,000 is one of the ways it's split up in the census data. I can give you within an 80% chance of success to tell you what kind of district and what kind of representative you're going to get out of that district. So the thing that happened on Tuesday along those lines, and what you basically see is that at the highest, the Democratic coalition now is at the highest end of the elite measures, income, education, home values, that kind of thing, and the lowest side of that. So they have the bookends, they have both extremes, and they're overrepresented in those. Republicans have been right in that middle. They have the middle levels of income, middle levels of educational attainment, more modest types of occupational pursuits, and so on. Higher levels of currently married status of the people in the district, kids in general, especially above poverty level. And what happened before is that what was stopping that from being a complete sorting is that a lot of districts would have a lot of the high-end elites and a lot of people in the middle and not very many sort of in the underclass category of socioeconomic levels. And that was sort of the firewall for Republicans to keep a lot of these suburban seats. That firewall went away on Tuesday. And if you look at across the board, the kind of suburban districts that flipped, there were all kinds of metro areas. A lot of them were the high end, the Southern California, LA metro, some remaining parts of, I think on the East Coast you had a few. You had Illinois, you had, in Chicago, you had some of those. But you also had more moderate income level suburban areas that the same thing happened to them. So Minneapolis and St. Paul, one of the more wealthy areas was Barbara Comstock's seat in Virginia. They all started flipping, and they had been kind of resistant to that trend for over a decade. And then Tuesday, I think I added up about 14 or 15 of them went. So now you have this situation where, compared to when I was growing up and getting involved in this stuff, it was very credible and I think quantifiable to say Republicans were the party of the rich in a sense. That's the other way now. And one thing I've noticed among my friends who are liberal, they hate that. They hate hearing that. And there's a little quote from, I don't know if you saw the Federalist piece today on Jerry Nadler. And Jerry Nadler, apparently, brilliant man that he is, constitutional expert and everything, he's future chairman now of the House Judiciary Committee, was having a very vocal conversation on an Acela train between Washington and New York with somebody, and whoever it was, it might have been Molly Hemingway, she wrote the piece.
It was Molly.
Must have recorded the whole conversation, at least his end of it. And one of the things that she writes about is, in another call, Nadler said Republicans did better than expected on election night because of the booming economy. He suggested messaging that the economy is only helping wealthy people and not other classes, that's his suggestion, and worried that changes to the economic boom would be blamed on Democrats. Here, I emphasize this. He also complained that the new voters being recruited to join Democrats were quote-unquote Rockefeller Republicans, who are more liberal on social issues, and that the new group makes Democrats more vulnerable to the charge they are no longer the party of the working person. And I think that fear is palpable across the Democratic side, and it became very, very apparent Tuesday night. In fact, if you look at even in the Senate, the states that are above the median income level there's like 22 of them, 44 Senate seats. All but 9 of those seats have Democrats in them now, and they're all very much progressive types. So I mean, I think that was the big.
That's an old. This has now been a genre for some time. Acela conversation, the overheard Acela conversation that becomes a column. So many people have been bitten in the behind by it over the years. I'm surprised anybody is still so indiscreet to have that kind of conversation, but thank God they are, because it makes for very entertaining reading. Mary Katherine.
Yeah, I feel like you should lose your seat if you're dumb enough to have it. That's not strictly democratic, but a technicality. Winners, I think actually a giant winner on Tuesday was Brett Kavanaugh. Brett Kavanaugh. I'm sure this is a microaggression at the very least, but I would call it Kavanaugh's revenge. Every single red state Democrat in a contested area where Trump won, who voted against him, went down, and Manchin stayed. I think partly because he voted for him, and you could see those numbers move as the Kavanaugh hearings were happening in post.
Wouldn't Tester be,
Tester
is the one exception? Yeah, okay.
So I think it's pretty rare that you have a fairly easily identifiable, or at least probable cause and effect like that, because you really did see poll numbers move, especially somewhere like Missouri, during the Kavanaugh affair, Kavanaugh, and shortly afterwards. So when I was asked on CNN about this, like, one big takeaway is, don't try that again, guys. And that's good news for all of us, and for due process, and just for Americans, because it turns out you should be punished for bringing one now obviously debunked, one recanted, and one accusation with zero corroborative evidence, including a date, to bear on a public servant. That should not benefit you, and it hasn't. Justice Kavanaugh is a justice, and they paid a very serious electoral price for it. And I hope that they will draw that conclusion. Although Nadler's conversation seems to suggest that that's not the case. They're like, we're gonna beat Brett Kavanaugh. I'm like, please walk down that road. Please continue to walk down that road. So I thought that was notable, and I think just good for civic health if they learn that lesson, because due process should be valued. Losers, I think. Obviously, Republicans lost the House. I will make less of a loser. It's a bit of a cheap shot, but whatever. Everywhere Obama
We like those.
campaign still can't transfer that power. Like, does not work. And they keep thinking it will. Another lesson unlearned. They send him out on the trail.
Yeah.
And everyone loves him, guys. Everyone loves Obama. That's, the media gets very excited. They get to play Obama speeches again. It's like going to a high school reunion for them. And in the end, it just doesn't translate to the other candidate. He cannot give that power to someone else, as we saw throughout his presidency, which is why they got wiped out on the state and local and level during his time. Something I expected, I did expect the nonsense conversation that we are now having about national popular vote, which is, let us be clear, not a thing. Not a thing. It's never meant to be a thing. And I love the one about the House in particular. It's like, well, we didn't win enough House seats based on the popular vote. These districts are literally made to be, wait for it, representative of the area they come from. And therefore, nationalizing the vote would obliterate the whole reason for them existing. But because they want to have that conversation, we're going to have that conversation, and as soon as Ezra Klein utters the phrase, which is a big phrase, it becomes something that we're all going to talk about. So I did expect that. I expected Republicans to lose the House, but I suspected, as did my colleague over here, that the blue wave would not come to fruition. I expected a little bit better news in the House, and did not see the Senate turning out so well. So that's good. Although Florida looks interesting.
Henry might be right about Florida.
Yeah, bite their nails about Florida. And then, yeah, I guess my surprise would just be that the Senate numbers looked so good. But I will caution that this continued sorting, even though it owns the libs by the fact that they are uncomfortable representing the rich, I do enjoy that. celebrating places like Texas where the numbers were too close, and where Beto made districts competitive with his coattails that would not have otherwise been. I think we're going to have to spend more money there. I think those areas are becoming more California-like, thanks to the Californians who moved to Texas because everyone in California ruined their lives, and then they're like, oh, let's do the same thing here. Another giant state to ruin. It's unwise, but it's actually how people behave, and we need to make an effort to woo them. And the suburbs are part of that. And the fact that we're losing them in large numbers concerns me. And then the last thing that concerned me, and actually this could go in the surprise category, there was a state that we didn't talk about at all in this election, and it's Colorado. Never heard about it because we were destined to lose basically everything there and do it early. And that is the symbol of what a state can become if you let things get away from you. It doesn't mean it's the end of the road there, although Jared Polis is an extremely progressive governor who ran as an extremely progressive governor. And he's not a John Hickenlooper. This is not a businessman who has any claim to being moderate. They want to turn Colorado into their homeland of California, and they are getting closer and closer. And I think there's real danger in that happening to several states if we don't work real hard.
So you answered my next question, so I'll just very briefly ask the two of you what you think. I was going to say, was there a Kavanaugh effect? How was it larger or smaller than you anticipated? Or you know, it was the thing that gave Republicans hope. I don't know, it seems like 10 years ago, but it was probably only about 6 weeks ago. This was going to turn everything around. Seemed to be doing so for a while, then it seemed to ebb away. What would you two say that effect it had?
I think it did. Remember the book Selena Zito wrote about the Great Revolt campaign, and I was struck in that book how many of the people she interviewed, most of the people who went from Obama to Trump, cited judges as part of their decision-making process. And I think what happened with Kavanaugh reminded them and reminded people like them that, you know, at the end of the day, you may not even like a candidate, but if the candidate's going to vote for these judges, and Trump's now demonstrated a commitment and a track record of nominating judges that are very, very exciting to the conservative movement and voter, it reminded them of that, and I think that brought them out much higher numbers than they otherwise would have. Maybe it did dissipate a little bit toward the end, but absent that, I think that Tuesday would be a whole lot different in the Senate.
I'll dissent a little bit. You know, I did not see, certainly Republican enthusiasm numbers popped up after that, but I tend to believe that a lot of people vote whether they say they're enthusiastic or not. I think it certainly helped with bringing out the marginal Republican. I think a lot of them would have voted anyway. I think it was part of what brought the Obama-Trump voter back, but I also think the president is the only Republican in national leadership who understands those voters. And talking about you know, making sure that NAFTA deal got done before the midterm mattered. The fact that he was talking about immigration mattered. And I do think the Kavanaugh thing helped, but perhaps as much in that the outsized, unanimous freak out that was on display for about 10 days probably reminded the Obama-Trump voter that this is not their grandfather's Democratic Party.
Right.
Well, and I think beyond that, the Kavanaugh thing brought out and made a different kind of voter respond. Frankly, a voter like me, who was not a Trump voter, who went, oh, this is what we're up against. Reminder, this is what we're up against. And I had, obviously, I think you saw it in the numbers too, but since the plural of anecdote is data, I did have several friends, particularly well-educated, women friends, moms who live in the suburbs, the exact kind of voter that we're losing, that during the Kavanaugh thing were texting me saying, you know what, I've kind of been out of the game for like 2 years, and this is ridiculous. Like, I'm back in. And that meant something to me. And to me, it was a very two-track messaging thing where the Kavanaugh thing brought in those voters, and sort of somewhat ironically, some of the immigration messaging seemed perfectly tailored to me to turn exactly those voters off and back home. But what it did speak to is the Obama-Trump voter, right? And so having a two-track message like that is very tricky. You don't know what you're losing and what you're gaining, but there were two things going on there and two types of voters who were responding to it.
So keying off on something else that you said, that Mary Katherine said, on the one hand, you know, the party in power tends to get slaughtered in a midterm. When you don't get slaughtered, there's a tendency to breathe a sigh of relief, maybe feel a little euphoria. Republicans didn't lose Texas, they didn't lose the Georgia governorship. We'll see what happens in Florida, but maybe, you know, the worst was averted. On the other hand, should Republicans be concerned that, look, when you have to sweat out a race in Texas, of all things, of Georgia, against fairly left-wing candidates, these are people not running as, you know, a Democrat of 15 years ago, a sort of blue dog type, does that portend a different future coming, and this was just a reprieve?
I think the Republican Party, before Trump, was a minority coalition that was slowly descending into irrelevance. That the conservative, business conservative Rhino coalition was a minority. It was not appealing to potential voters, and it was, and every 4 years it would become smaller because of demographic change. Trump has created a new minority coalition, one that can elect, because of where these voters live, president, but also does not represent a majority of the voters. What you have to do is find a way to put the rhinos and the tigers together in one party. And that is something I think may be hard for Trump to do, although I can imagine ways that he could try and do it, but is one that would definitely is the only way to put together a national coalition to hold back the resurgent left. And it's not one that can be put together on neo-libertarian grounds, because it requires acceptance of government and actually an embrace of some degree of limited government intervention to help average people pursue opportunity when they don't have the resources, or when there are, in the case of, you know, like women and discrimination, serious obstacles in their way.
Which question are we asking right now?
Should we be worried about the near loss of places that used to be solidly red?
Yes, and this is the trick, is the balancing act, right? And it's very hard to do. I was struck by the fact that somebody like a Stacey Abrams, she wasn't really hiding the fact that she was progressive, and this is Georgia. So that's interesting to me, and I think her superpower, such that it was, she did not win, but like the way she was able to run closer, I think, is that she did not allow Trump to drive her insane. And very few Democrats have this superpower, particularly progressives. They are so tempted to run as far left as possible, to get all the money, to get all the accolades, to get all the Twitter likes. And it's very easy to do that and feel like you're killing it, except you're not actually talking to voters. And I thought she was actually sort of surprisingly disciplined at times. Like Jake Tapper the other day I was watching asked her about some of Trump's comments, specifically about her not being qualified. And I expected her to lecture him, to say he's a bad person, to do some race stuff possibly. She goes immediately to like, let me tell you what my qualifications are. And she's aiming that message at the suburban, white, educated woman voter. There's a plus for us, which is that not many of them have that talent, right? Not many progressives can figure out that they need to be talking to voters and not just to progressive fundraisers and people who will donate to them online. It's a very different game. But I do think we need to be worried, and we need to be working hard to try to hit this balance in a way that does not turn off the rhino suburban woman who is should be a part of your community and should be, you know, somebody you're trying to reach, partly because our policies are good for them, right? Not just the game. So it does worry me, and it worries me because I think there's an age problem that we have too. And the numbers of young people who came out to vote were very serious for a midterm. And you cannot rely in the same way you used to on people growing up and becoming conservative just because. Once those patterns are locked in, as they are in California before they move to Texas. It's hard to overcome them. And I worry that we're putting up too many barriers to actually closing that gap at least a little bit before those guys are in their 30s and 40s and really locked in.
Cruz, I think, is an aberration in the sense that he is not the most likable person.
Which makes it all the more delicious that
Yeah.
their matinee idol goes down to him, by the way.
I wouldn't have been at all surprised if he lost, but having been in and around with him on Capitol Hill, it's unbelievable what kind of reaction he provokes in people. And I think that stuck with him, years later. This is through the 14 or so cycle. And the last 2 years has been a bit more in cycle to run for office. Behavior change a bit, but I don't think he forgot. The other part is that, a lot of this in terms of the red state concerns, for midterm, this was in the aggregate numbers of House seats shifting and Senate seats shifting, and even at the state level, there were only pulling 350 or so losses at the state legislative level. Most of those seem to be in New Hampshire, which they have like 8,000 people in the poll. This is, in some ways, a normalization of Donald Trump, which is another thing, maybe more than, I'd say, the Democrats are the party of rich, to talk about Donald Trump as kind of normal context. Talk about what school, foreign policy traditions he fits into, whatever. This kind of ratified a lot of things he did in ways that the left wants him to be this non-person, this subhuman. Mm-hmm. He became human in some ways on Tuesday by virtue of this not being a real outlier election in any real way.
So I think we're about to go to the audience shortly, but I have two more questions, and you can either answer both or one or neither, whatever you want. One of them is about the election. One of them is more of a look forward, picking up again on something Mary Katherine said. So the election question is, look, one party held the House for 40 years prior to 1994, and if you take out the sort of Truman anomaly, the anti-Truman anomaly, you have to go back to the New Deal. So it's really 70-year control. Now we've seen this extraordinary volatility in the House, where it changes hands in a way that is, if not unprecedented in American history. You have to go back a long, long time. What are the prospects? Do you see any prospect for one or the other party to lock back in long-term control of the House, or are we going to see, do the Republicans have a realistic chance of taking it again in the near term, even in 2 years, or if not in 2 years, in 4 years, 8 years, 6 years? And then the other question is, this is less about yesterday, but more about the result of yesterday. So it seems to me that Democrats, it's not an original insight, I just want to get your take on it. They're in kind of a bind, right? The same people you're talking about that write the fundraising letters and do all that stuff, they just demand impeachment. It has to happen sooner rather than later, immediately. Probably if there are any cooler heads in the Democratic leadership, they may see that that's not the best course to follow immediately. They might remember 1998, 99. They know that a conviction is impossible. And they also, maybe they have things that they want to do with these 2 years rather than swallow them up entirely with an impeachment that is going to go nowhere. So how do they walk that line without, provoking a mutiny among their base, but without also just turning off these voters in the middle who would see impeachment as folly and futile?
Well, I'll take the first question. We are as more finely balanced between the two parties than at any time than since the period between 1876 and 1896, when the South voted Democrat, the North voted Republican, and there were certain swing states, and it was the era when there was lots of partisan change and nobody got 50% of the vote. What broke that was when one party moved outside of a mainstream, and the other party was shrewd enough to capture it, and that was the Democrats with William Jennings Bryan, the Republicans, by making themselves the party of capital and labor simultaneously. And I think the party that does that, the party that can figure out how to put together the two swing groups in American politics today, the upscale suburbanite and the downscale worker, and marry it with their base, is the party that will run things for 10 years and set the tone for the ensuing decade. It's not clear that either party's base leadership knows how to do it, and it's not clear that either party's base really wants to do it. And that's one reason why we keep having these wild swings. We actually probably have more 25-seat swings in the House over the past decade than at any period in the last century. And that's precisely because, to use a tennis analogy, the serve passes to one party and then they double fault and it goes back to the other.
A little bit of math here. It looks like they're going to have, what, 230 or so in the House?
230 to 233, yeah.
So my own thesis is, when we asked to make predictions before the election, my joke was, I think the good Lord has a sense of humor, and whoever gets the majority, it's going to be such a narrow majority that it'll make the House even less functional than it is today. In fact, now, the Democrats look like they're going to have enough of a working majority to take away any excuse that they can't satisfy the demands of their base. So it's not just impeachment, it's Medicare for all. You want to have a fun policy discussion, get Medicare for all moving through the committees and getting to the point of being ready to be voted in the House. Every federal worker will lose his or her health coverage, right? And something be thrown into Medicare. Every military, family, same thing. Every person in the private sector who gets their coverage through work, same thing. So I think that the wise people in the Democratic Party do not want the demands of their base to actually become any form of reality, get in that legislative dance and start moving forward in the pipeline. But I think the margin is going to be large enough that they will not be able to plausibly look to their base and say, wait 2 more years, give us 2 more years when we really build our majority and get a president and get the Senate back and so on. So I think they're going to get stuck with having to appease the wild base that they have developed over the last number of years.
Would you expect that to cost them in 2020?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's going to be Trump's the greatest in-kind gift anyone can give to Donald Trump.
I have both recency bias and my own personal bias because volatility has been the name of the game essentially my entire political coming of age. So I think it's likely here to stay. I will say that behooving the Republican Party is the fact that during the Obama years, all of those state legislature seats for Democrats were wiped out, and local legislatures and all that, or local figures and all that stuff, meaning that our bench is surprisingly deep. And so it may mean that we have a bunch of people who can thread the needle coming up, who have had careers and have had practice, and Democrats will have fewer of them because they haven't been in office, because we beat them. So interesting for the future of House races and that kind of thing. I do think Trump and the Republican Party's greatest allies are the economy and Democrats acting insane. Those are the two things that will really lead to wins for us. And Donald Trump has a truly amazing talent of making his adversaries act like their worst selves at all times. It is remarkable. And they all say, like, oh, the problem I have with this president is he's destroying norms and disrespecting institutions. And so in order to fight him, I am going to destroy some norms and disrespect some institutions. Like guys, this is not the way to go about doing this. But because he has this power, I fully expect House Democrats to continue to succumb to it. And because their base will require it of them. And because despite the fact that Nancy Pelosi gave actually quite a decent speech the other night in which she did not go after Trump because she knew that wasn't the answer, she's still Nancy Pelosi. And she will remain the speaker because she wouldn't even walk away when they were getting wiped out. She's like, nah, I'm just going to stay in charge, guys. So she's not going to do it now. There is no viable alternative. She will remain a figure who improbably, I thought it would stop working, but it hasn't stopped working. She continues to bring Republicans out and to make people think to vote based on her. So they will continue to be their worst selves, politically speaking and strategically speaking, and that will likely lead to a 2020 victory for Trump. I think I just have seen no evidence that they're going to Connor Lamb this 2020 thing. They're going to have 27 people, and they're all going to be fighting to be as crazy as possible. And the thing that I've just been amazed. I did 2016 and 2018 now at CNN. I was at Fox before. And the extent to which, and this goes for many people in this city, it's a cliche at this point, but the extent to which people do not understand that people see things differently there than they do here. And this obsession with Trump's character and Trump's actions and Trump's tweets, it just does not read the same out in other states, right? And they cannot get that through their heads. And I think that continued chasm will also lead to the probability of victories in the future for Republicans.
Okay. So we're going to turn it over to the audience now, and we have people with microphones, so your hands go up. Yes, sir, in the front here. Just wait for the mic.
Thank you. That was a great talk. You were talking about futures and made some comment about the Republicans being older, but when I look at the future and see what the Democrats are proposing for possible presidential candidates, I'm looking at people that are generally 70 years and older, which is fine. I like those people.
I aspire to be one of those people one day, so.
I can identify with those people. But that looks like a weak bench to me when Joe Biden is being tossed as the most competitive member of the Democrat Party. He's going to be, what, 76, 77 when he'd run? I think he's 74, 75 now. And where's the strength is there any strength in the Democratic Party? I hope the answer is no, but that it might constitute a real threat.
To which I would add, for the panel's consideration, not only I agree with the premise, but the Republicans, we thought it was absurd and unhelpful to have 17 primary candidates in 2016. What I'm hearing now, at least speculative, we'll see what actually happens, is the Democrats might have 30 to 35, at least initially, audition for the role. Maybe they don't get to the first debate podium, but what do you foresee on that side in terms of both the strength of the bench and just the sheer numbers?
One thing I would point out, I think Democrats' close ties to the entertainment industry, Hollywood, and so on, have to be taken into account here, because I think it lowers a bar for them to turn to the charismatic candidate. Someone once joked that the way Democratic voters pick their presidential nominee is more like a summer fling, and Republicans, it's somewhat like an arranged marriage, and it's whoever's next in line. The fact that personality and charisma is ranked so much higher, I think, on their scale of values and priorities when they select a candidate, suggests that they may not look to the people that are on the board right now, especially in Congress. They might be looking outside Congress and the governor's houses to Hollywood, to Silicon Valley, to places like that for the newest charismatic type leader. I mean, it worked. The Republicans found Trump, or Trump found the Republicans. So I'd say that.
Yeah, I think one thing, I do not think that any of the current frontrunners is going to be the nominee. I don't think Biden's going to be the nominee. I don't think Warren's going to be the nominee. I don't think Sanders is going to be the nominee. I think they are going to find somebody who is not 70 years or older. And I think they are likely to nominate a woman. That is not an accident. That there are going to be 99 Democratic women in the House because 62% of the primary electorate of the Democratic Party is female. When you put that together with the rising power of non-whites, I think you have to give Kamala Harris a very strong upward chance of being the nominee. And I think you also have to look and see whether or not a woman will emerge on the less progressive side. I think that somebody like Amy Klobuchar, who earned kudos for her non-hysterical, or no, I'm sorry, but I'd be thrown off of CNN for that word, non-emotionally charged questions. For Democrats who would like to fight fire with fire, but still want somebody who's a liberal, who, by the way, has won her state in the Midwest and knows how to talk to Midwestern voters, I think she could, find a strong showing. So I do not think that one of the dinosaurs is going to lead their party.
Okay. Yes, sir. I'll just wait a moment for the microphone.
Thank you. I would start with a little bit of exaggerated metaphor to make my question. the situation now is pretty good. We're pretty evenly balanced and all that good stuff, but the Democrats have two big nuclear rockets who are already flying. One is called low-skill immigration, and the other one is called identity politics. And all we have against this is our bows and arrows of economic talk and political philosophy taught about opportunities. And so I'm looking and I'm thinking, isn't it time for us to see that we have to develop our own identity politics, and we have to develop our own immigration already, the president has seen that. But I think the work of Dinesh D'Souza has been amazing, of basically retelling the history of this country and retelling the role of the Democratic Party and of the Republican Party and building a new identity. Because if you think about Trump, and that's my question actually, I think the biggest thing about Trump is that he had the courage to call them bad people. We've been living in this country forever, and I'm an immigrant, but they call us bad people all the time, all the isms, and we have basically accepted to live with it. He was the first one who called them back bad people, fake news, whatever.
Right.
So
I'm going to rephrase.
Do you see something along those lines? I'm sorry.
Rephrase the question slightly in that, maybe not so much do the Republicans need to adopt identity politics. So I'm going to rephrase it and then answer it, at least give my own answer. But do they need to find a way to answer and come up with an antidote to identity politics? I think the answer is absolutely. And they haven't done it. Trump is the first to at least begin to find a way, it seems to me, in part because he doesn't immediately accept the premise of a tax on him, which most Republicans do. But I'd like to hear what you all have to say.
I'm starting. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, I think part of the power of Trump is that he smashes the paradigm, right? And it's because he's willing to say, no, you guys are bad actors. Like, this is not, you can't come at me with this when you're doing this. And like, yes, I think I grant that plenty of Republicans have played too nice on this front in the past. And I think there's a ton of merit in the fact that it cracks me up that people sort of look back with rose-colored glasses to a pre-Trump era, like politics was like really doing great before. And I'm like, no, the way we did politics before is what created Robot Rubio, that moment where a very talented politician and talker and an interesting person got stuck in this rut because they've all been taught, I can't veer from the message. I have to say this over and over and over again. Well, Trump just came along and was like, oh yeah, you wanna see gaffes? I got gaffes. I got gaffes for days. And they just can't focus on one, right? So it just sort of, the whole machine sort of started sputtering and smoking. And there's merit to that. So I think that's really powerful, and I think that a lot of people underestimate the extent to which Trump is a response to the left in this country telling really good people that they're the problem with America. Like responsible people just raising families and working. You are the problem with America. You're trash. You're probably racist and sexist. Yeah, you're deplorables. And the extent to which he was a response to that, I think still people underestimate. And I joke with liberal friends that, if you're worried about like reaching out to Trump voters, the good news is that like 99% of them are nicer than Trump. And what they said was like, I'm not mean enough to be this guy, but I'm going to hire this guy to be mean for me. And that's a real part of this.
One interpretation I had from the 2016 election goes right toward the core of this identity politics issue, which is that without really realizing at some point, non-college educated whites became an identity group. In the 2008 election, McCain got 58% of that group. Romney got 61, and then Trump came in around 67. And I don't know where you draw what percentage would qualify as a group to be an identity politics group. But Democrats have long had these very high margins. African Americans obviously have been up around 95% or more, and Asians and Hispanics 75 to 80%. So now all of a sudden, a group that's a lot larger than those groups started to look around and say, well, maybe this room's emptying out of these other folks, and we're the ones who are left here, and this guy's telling us, like Mary Kate just said, that it's a very, I have your back, I understand what you're suffering, and so on. And it just happened. So maybe that's one reason this vitriol against Trump is so great, is that the identity politics monster is turned on the Democratic Party. Maybe that's the beginning of getting rid of it. Maybe that realization at some point was, this ain't working, and we have to get rid of this toxin in our body politic and move on.
I'd just say that fundamentally, whenever American politics shifts, and it does shift, new coalitions are formed and defined and age every 30 or 40 years, and we're living through that now. The argument is always, what does it mean to be an American? So what does our revolutionary heritage mean for today? And the Democrats' answer is, in order to be truly free, in order to be truly include everybody, we have to divide everybody into tribes. And if the Republican answer is to say, well, my tribe's bigger, that's not actually an answer. I think the answer that people want is an answer that says we can all be part of something that we can be proud of. And so when Trump is never going to be the person who does that, but at the heart of everything that he pushes is that sense of, wait a minute, we've betrayed what it means to be an American, and we need to get that right again. And I think Trump's successor will be the person who can successfully articulate what is inchoate and present in Trump, but which he does not, in fact, articulate himself.
All right, I have a comment and then maybe a follow-up question just on that. I sort of see what you're saying, that Trump will never be the person to do that, if that's just because of his colorfulness, bombasticness. He turns off too many people. Although he does speak exactly the language that you're talking about. When he talks about nationalism, he's accused of white nationalism and other things, which is completely preposterous. Every time he opens his mouth and talks about the subject, maybe I was going to say he sounds exactly like Abraham Lincoln. That's probably going too far in terms of the actual words and the rhetoric used. But the thoughts are the same. They're identical to the way Lincoln expressed the idea of citizenship. So I know maybe the party needs a different spokesperson, but he has shown the way.
Well, that's what I meant by it's there. I mean,
Right.
I wrote an article a couple of years ago when Trump was in the primaries, arguing that what the thread, that if you look at Trump as, well, he's got these white blue-collar people, he's got this is before the general election. What drives the Trump Republican coalition was citizenship.
Yeah.
But what Trump will never do, unless he has somebody who gets his mind and is also skillful in the words, is Trump is never the sort of person who's going to be able to make the argument from A to B and know how to put that argument in the middle of all of the situations. Reagan could, because Reagan wrote his own philosophy and wrote his own scripts. Trump's got the ideas, but it's going to require either somebody to do it for him who understands them and can put them into an argument form, or somebody after him who gets all of the things that he gets, but has a little bit more storytelling, narrative, argumentation ability.
Okay, so it leads me to the question that I wanted to ask, which is, I've been going around saying sort of more, maybe hopefully than in certainty, but we all know it doesn't take a whole lot of the black or the Hispanic vote for Trump to carve away from the Democrats, and they have a serious problem. I think it's also fair to say demographically, black and Hispanic voters are much more likely to be on the blue-collar side, low-income side, or at least the working-class side, than the old parts of the Republican coalition. What are the prospects for a kind of ethnic, transracial Trump appeal to blue-collar voters that doesn't capture, let's say, majorities of black and Hispanic voters, but starts to get seriously into the 20s, would be enough to be a grave danger to Democrats? I mean, how likely do you think that prospect is?
With Trump, I think it's likelier to happen among Hispanics than it is among blacks. But that's the future of the pre-Trump Republican Party dealt with the fact that whites are a shrinking share of America in two mutually destructive ways. One is the business wing saying that basically all these people want to be entrepreneurs, and all we have to do is get rid of the icky parts of our party, which just happen to be the conservatives. And they'll like us. And the other is, the Koch brothers, all we have to do is educate them all about the wonderfulness of libertarianism, and they'll be here. Actually, these people are working class people. They want what working class people have always wanted, opportunity and security, and they want a government strong enough to keep them safe from harm, and they want a government that is respectful enough that gets the heck out of the way. Trump represents that, and I think if the Republican Party embraced that aspect of Trump, they would find that they'd go over a 20-year period from a third of the Hispanic vote to 45%, from 9% of the black vote to 20 or 25%, and that would destroy the Democratic Party.
Can I just add that they were already sort of seeing this pre-midterms in the Hispanic numbers and getting worried because it did not look like they would turn out en masse, and they were not as turned off by Trump as everyone assumed they should be, right? And that's part of what I mean about people seeing things so differently here. Like, obviously, Hispanics would hate him in huge numbers, and if you look at the numbers, that's not actually that true. And if you really want to blow their minds, remind them at the midterms, same point in his presidency for Obama, Trump's numbers with Hispanics in several polls were like maybe 5 points lower. I mean, it's remarkable. It's remarkably close. So there's already ground there that you could work on. It does concern me, as you've noted, like, Trump's not the guy who goes to that room and makes that argument successfully. And there's an alternative history where I wish he was slightly different and more capable of doing that, because I do think there are people, particularly blue-collar Black and Hispanic men, that he could win over if he put in a little bit of work on that. I think you still have the issue of minority women combined with suburban white college-educated women. You put those two groups together who are fairly turned off by Trump in many ways, and you got a problem if you're not reaching them as well, even if you're able to turn some of those male voters. So.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Quick point. July of 16, Pew did a survey of Hispanics, and they divided the sample into English-dominant and Spanish-dominant. The Spanish-dominant part of that sample was in favor of Clinton by something like 68 to 26. The English-dominant Hispanics were in favor of Clinton by only 7 points, 48-41. I don't know what that means, except maybe Hispanic Americans who were born here or who are more assimilated into our culture, Matt Spolsky, calling office, are going to look at this situation differently than those who might be more segregated from it. And maybe speaking English or dominant in Spanish might be one marker of that. And that only can get, that group, the English dominant, is only going to grow over time, and maybe that's going to look like what happened to Italians and Irish and Poles and so on. At some point, they become integrated into the body politic as a whole and are indistinguishable.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I was curious on your take for the polarization in the country, maybe the good, the bad, the ugly of it, and is there a fix, and should there be a fix?
My quick take on it is, it seems like it's different than it has been in the past because the polarization is multidimensional. It goes into a lot of different areas. I don't think you used to be able to look at someone's level of educational attainment and predict political behavior as quickly and easily as you can today. And that applies to a whole lot of other markers as well. So that's a pretty deep, set of interlocking dynamics that are at work here. I think it's going to be hard to undo that anytime soon.
Okay. Well, please join me in thanking our panelists.